Given today's world, where does one begin? Looking at order and disorder. What's happening since the 28th of February in the Persian Gulf is there for all to see. We are now in a position of no war, no peace. Everyone is tracking how many tankers are getting through the Straits of Hormuz today. That's where the world has come to. We don't really know whether the negotiations which are being held by Pakistan are going to succeed or whether there's going to be another round of war. Depends on what time of the day you see Donald Trump's Truth Social posts. It's either going to be war or it's going to be a negotiated agreement or a pathway to an agreement. So, what's really happening? I mean, how is the world going to cope? Nearly 25% of the world's energy supplies comes through the Straits of Hormuz. And the Iranians are saying they are going to control it. We are now in a situation where the US president is laughable and now says that he's eminently qualified to be the next prime minister of Israel. That's what his last comment has been. So, to look at how the world has changed, altered, it's in order or in disorder, I'm joined by a very special guest today, Nayan Chanda, former editor of Yale Global Online, former editor of the Far Eastern Economic Review, former Washington correspondent for several years of the Far Eastern Economic Review, contributor to the Statesman, Hindustan Times, knows Southeast Asia well, was of course present in 1975 in Saigon when the last helicopter took off. So Nayan Chanda knows the United States well. He's written about it a lot. He's written a lot on globalization as well. His book, Bound Together. And of course, for me, his most celebrated and famous book, Brother Enemy, about Cambodia and Southeast Asia, is absolutely a classic. So, welcome to Speakeasy, Nayan.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, I just wanted to ask you, you've been a reporter, if I may call you that,
Sure.
for 55 years, And did you ever expect that you'd see a president like this sitting in the White House?
I don't think anybody could have imagined this is something extraordinary. Given the fact that the United States have so far prided itself as a country of rule of law, of freedom of press, and that country has come to a stage which is absolutely unthinkable, even perhaps 5 years ago.
So what is your sense, with whatever's happened and happening, and not just in Iran? I mean, let's look at Venezuela, let's look at Cuba, all the things that Donald Trump is trying to do. So is it a case of fading American power or assertive American power?
I think whether it is fading or assertive may be a bit too early to predict, but one can see how we have come to this state of disorder. The disorder didn't start with Donald Trump, he accelerated it, but it started at least 25 years ago. The Kosovo crisis, when the NATO intervened in a country with, with the air power without any approval from the United Nations. Then comes a series of American intervention. The most famous of it is the Iraq intervention in 2003. And the impact of that intervention we have seen continuously. The Iraqi regime was overthrown. In its place emerged whole series of terrorist groups, and their result, the consequence of that is still being felt in our neighborhood in Afghanistan. That is this ISIS Khorasan, which is a progeny of what began in 2003. So, disorder began with small things. For instance, in 2019, the United States finally stopped appointing its candidate for the World Trade WTO's Trade Dispute Council. As a result, WTO is inoperative. So, where is an international organization which held together the world trade has been made dysfunctional? United States has withdrawn from WHO. It has withdrawn from Paris climate change. So, some of the institutions that were built by the United States and others have been systematically dismantled. And so, what happened since then, it's a kind of free for all. If the Americans can go and set up bases wherever they want, Chinese says, why not us? Chinese have created some 7 bases in the South China Sea. They have reclaimed land from the sea, and in violation of international law, they have made air base and the missile base in those spaces. So countries are going ahead and doing things which were unthinkable just a few years ago because there was some international law. People respected the law, and if they did not, they were taken to court. So there was the enforcement mechanism. So if there is no enforcement, law may exist, has no value. If there is no predictability of action, that what action taken, what would be the consequences of that, you could see that this is going to be taken to the Security Council. Security Council inoperative, basically. So institutions have been either dismantled or hollowed out, which could preserve a degree of order, predictability. And so that has gone. And so what Trump is doing is the kind of a final stage of dismantling of this order.
So we do know that power vacuums are often filled up, and you're very right to point out about the WTO, because I recall very well how the Western world was very keen that China and Russia should become members of the WTO and they should be part of the rules-based trading order. But anyway, all that is history. So this power vacuum, or this disorder that we see, many regional players, countries like Saudi Arabia, they have attempted armed attacks in their part of the world. We see Pakistan, as you said. If there is a precedent, a lot
Yeah.
of things happen. So do you think that you also mentioned the basis that China is setting up? Do you think that China is filling or is going to fill the American space, in a sense?
To some extent, certainly in Asia. Outside Asia, their only base is in Djibouti, but Djibouti is very important for keeping an eye on the Gulf, on the vital sea lanes which carry oil for China. But the Chinese presence all over Southeast Asia, like they are building a naval base in Cambodia, in Ream. They have um, begun building a port in Burma, KKPU. They have the in they are expanding their maritime force in Southeast Asia is enormous. They have got Coast Guard ship which are like destroyers, huge Coast Guard ship. They are going around and enforcing law, the Chinese law. They said, we forbid you from fishing here. And so local fishermen are being shooed away by the Chinese gunboats. So this is happening now regularly, and there is no recourse to it. Philippines took China to the international court. International court, after deliberation, said Chinese are in the wrong. Philippines have claim to this island. Chinese said this is not what the paper it is written on. So this ignored the decision of the court. So these are the the disorder that we are seeing.
Again, the precedent
Yeah,
exists
yeah,
here.
yeah.
So, and I mean, apart from the basis and all, but do you feel that China, as an economic power, as an economy, is it now in a position to challenge, what was U.S. hegemony?
It is and it is not. In the sense that you have to also remember that Chinese power is built on American market. Chinese, thanks to the short-sightedness of business corporations, they moved their production facilities to China, and from China, these goods are flooding the West. So anything worth more than $50 in any supermarket, either in China or in US or Europe, would be made in China. So the Chinese success is because the access to this market. And that is why the Chinese also have to remember that they can pressure the West only to extent that that doesn't kill the goose.
But they also have a huge domestic market, the Chinese.
The domestic market actually is very small compared to what they have outside China. And the domestic market is also because of China's kind of very skewed economic system. The local population, they don't want to spend. The Chinese government has to give them incentive to buy because they are hoarding their money. They're either putting in the bank or they're buying some apartments because they have no faith how they will survive in their old age. So,
So to look at the global scenario, we are looking at the US, we are looking at China, we are looking at the European Union, we are looking at Russia. So how do you think these powers, how are they faring? And say in the next 5 years, 10 years, how do you think the global scenario is going to look like?
I think one thing is sure that the Chinese have now got the upper hand in terms of technology. Earlier, people said Chinese are simply copycats. But Chinese are now innovating and producing goods which are superior than the goods produced in the West. Chinese are behind the United States and others only in semiconductor, in certain like 3 nanometer semiconductor, they still are unable to produce. But they are producing many other advanced chips which are fueling their technology. And so their technology in especially in electronics, in rocketry, and they have also now produced a, a passenger jet plane. So the Chinese have advanced enormously in their industrial and manufacturing prowess. What the Chinese, their problem is population. The population actually is going to beginning to shrink. So the labor force that fuel China's low cost production is now being replaced by robots. But that is still takes some time. And so the China's desire to make a country rich before they get old is still questionable whether Chinese will succeed that. And China's banking system is in big trouble because of lending to companies who have squandered their money, built huge housing which are lying unoccupied. And so the China's real estate and banking is in big trouble. So China has something that I mentioned, technologically China is advanced, but Chinese also have to make sure that they can sell their products outside China. And the Chinese have one major advantage you didn't mention is the Chinese have now captured almost 80% of rare earth minerals, which are critical to make all high tech equipment, whether it is jet engine, even automobiles. Automobile production is affected because the Chinese have
We saw
stopped.
that in Europe, yeah,
Yes.
when the ban was placed and then it had to be withdrawn.
So the Chinese control of the rare earth gives them a huge um, sort of bargaining chip. And that's exactly why Donald Trump withdrew its tariff when the Busan meeting took place last year in October between Trump and she said, well, we are going to restrict our sale of rare earth material. And so the Trump climbed down. Yeah.
And how do you look at the Europe and Russia and how are and the US, of course? I mean, how
Yeah.
is that? Because there are tensions between Europe and America.
Yeah.
Future of NATO itself is in question.
Yeah, I think Russia is really feeling foolish having undertaken that adventure in Ukraine. They were so sure that they would just sweep into Kiev and set up a government of their own choosing 4 years now. And now the latest report is that Russians are actually ceding territory which they had earlier occupied because of the relentless attack by drones from the Ukrainians. And Ukrainian drone attack has gone hundreds of miles inside Russia. And they, in fact, attacked Moscow just a week before the celebration, leading to clamor for a ceasefire, even for those days when Moscow is holding its National Day parade. And so Moscow is um, feeling that it has lost about 3% of its armed forces manpower since in the last
But it
4 years.
looks like a standoff there.
It is standoff, and Moscow is now basically saying that if they can somehow turn it around with the help of the Chinese, and Chinese are very cautious. Chinese have promised they are not going to give any weapons to Russia, but they are giving components to make the drones that Chinese have been given, but that may not be now adequate to turn the tide.
And what about Europe? How
But
is
the Russians
yeah?
have one advantage is the Russians have huge reserves of oil and gas, and they are promising to China that we are going to be your steady supply. They're trying to set up a pipeline, which will be uh, not affected by anything that happens in the Middle East. China would have a sure supply of gas and oil from Russia.
Right.
And so that and that is what Putin in Moscow speaking Beijing now last week.
Yeah.
This is what he promised that we are going to ensure your energy security from Russia.
And what is your sense of Europe? How it's is it? Are they are also backing the Ukrainians to the hilt, which it seems a bit strange because you would imagine that efforts would have been made by some of the big European players to try and ensure that there's a negotiated end to this war.
They did. In fact, initially the Russians did use their energy supply power because Russian energy basically heats the homes of European countries. But after the Ukraine invasion, the Europeans stopped buying Russian gas. And so now the Russians are do not count on the European market. And that is one reason also they want to ensure that they have a market in China. But Europeans, they feel that if they did not protect Ukraine from this violation of the international the border, that is the once you accept that somebody can buck into your country and change the border at will, then there is no end to it. European borders will be very, very vulnerable to changes like this by a powerful lever. And so Crimea was the first shot. They swallowed it, but when Ukraine came, they said that's too far.
But the Russians say that is because of NATO and its expansion.
Yeah.
And there was no strategic reason after the downfall of the Soviet Union for NATO to expand in the way it did.
Yeah.
And many warnings were issued by the Russians at that time. That's what their contention.
Their contention. But the fact is that if you look at the Russian domestic media, there have been a build-up of nationalism that Ukraine actually has no right to exist. Ukraine has been part of Russia, and that has been the narrative that developed in Russia. So it was a power grab. Putin felt that Putin felt humiliated by what happened to Soviet Union, and so he had said that this was a disaster what Gorbachev did by dissolving the Soviet Union, and so Putin has been trying to regain some of Russia's old glory. And when he successfully took Crimea, he was encouraged. And so next step was to try to take Ukraine. And it was a grab for the entire country, not just the border provinces.
So, how do you explain this equation between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin? I mean, what is your sense of that?
Well, I think one is that Trump has a genuine admiration for dictators. He just loves them, that they are, because he says,
Which is why he likes the field marshal in Pakistan as well.
yes, he loves Kim Jong Un. He says he's strong. He just he commands and people do things. So he just appreciates that power. And so if you look at the adjectives he uses for Xi Jinping or Kim Jong Un, then they're strong. They're when in fact at one point Trump said that I like the way Kim Jong Un enters the hall and people stand up, and then and whenever he speaks, they all listen very carefully. And so this is the attributes of a leader, that he is very strong and he enforces his law, and Trump wishes that he could do that in the United States. Yeah.
And so you think it's only that? I mean, there are also suggestions that
No.
Russian intelligence has some
Yeah.
dope on him and so on.
Yeah, that is speculation has for a long time, and the fact is that Putin's standard operating procedure is to use compromise to control people. So it is possible one doesn't have any evidence, but the fact is that uh, Trump has been very, very, um, I would say, um, not not
Not servile.
not servile, but very, very
Deferential?
deferential towards Putin. The first meeting in Helsinki, he basically says he believes Putin more than his own intelligence agencies, who established that Putin actually tried to influence the election. And so there's enough evidence that Putin did that. But Trump publicly says that he rather believes Putin. And so, why is this subservience? There's speculation.
Right. To come to the United States now, we know there are going to be midterm elections. There is a lot of political opposition to Trump as well domestically. But do you see any changes in the Trumpian approach in the next 2.5 years? Because he still has a good 2 years plus of his term to go.
I don't see, in fact, the latest results of in the election, the nomination of the Republican candidates. Trump has got very significant gains. So, Trump is going to make every possible attempt by gerrymandering and by, of course, spending huge amount of money for the campaign, that to change the outcome of the midterm election. But midterm election is going to be very difficult for him to win. And of course, there's speculation whether he would actually allow the elections to be held. There may be some national emergency.
Can he do that?
They can. If there's a national emergency, you can postpone the election. But But there are things that, like yesterday, they indicted Raul Castro, the brother of Fidel. Uh, he's in Cuba. He has been indicted by American court, and so speculation is that are they going to do to him what they did to Maduro of Venezuela? Maduro was indicted in New York court, and the next thing you know, the American special forces land in Caracas and grabs him. So Cuba may be another hotspot coming up.
You think Cuba may be another hotspot coming?
Yeah.
And overall, I mean, I was asking you at the beginning of our conversation about the role and status of the United States. One thing is clear that it's not predictable. Whatever the Americans are doing, whether we see tariffs, we see Maduro, we see
Yeah.
Cuba, whatever you mentioned. So, how does the rest of the world deal with the United States of America?
Everybody just wakes up in the morning and checks this Truth Social. What's the post today? So that's how you you find out what America is going to do next. So this is not sustainable. Not sustainable, but uh, the whole world, because of the enormous power the US still has, economic power, military power, um, so they are differential to whatever Trump is doing, but with great resentment. Resentment is kind of overwhelming throughout the world.
But don't you think that America's military power has really been challenged by Iran? I mean, 3 months down the line,
Yeah.
Iran is still standing. Their
Yeah.
capabilities are there.
Yeah.
They brought down a number of, top flight American aircraft.
Yeah.
So how do you see that?
I think this Iran war will be studied in years to come as a turning point in sort of as world strategy. Because if you see how the Iranians use their cheap drones to attack targets deep inside in the Middle East and in the Gulf, um, helped by the Chinese satellite data. And that is without that, only the drones wouldn't have been able to do it. Drones could absolutely target, pinpoint targeting of objects thanks to the satellite data. So the combination of some external assistance and their own innovation, the Iranians have shown that the power balance based on tonnage of warships or or the Mach speed of jet planes may not be enough to establish your domination.
So what happens now? I mean, the Iranians have shown that they're still standing. They're ready for another round if the Americans so want it or Donald Trump so wants it. So if there is no negotiated end to this crisis, this war unleashed by the United States, so what will happen now? I mean, will this be like a standoff situation, like what we see in Ukraine? Will it be something like that?
At this point,
In a different way, of course. Yeah.
looks like they have set up a sort of authority to control the Strait of Hormuz, and now regularly ships are passing. One doesn't know what kind of deal these countries are concluding with Iran to allow those ships to pass, whether they're paying in cryptocurrency or renminbi, because the Americans have said that they won't accept any control over the passage. In other words, you should not be able to, you should not be paying for your passage. But at this point, looks like Iranians are collecting and the ships are passing. The fact that the Iranian foreign minister has visited so many countries which are allies of the United States, including Japan, he has been to, Anakshi has been to Japan. And so, what are the deals that Iranians are concluding with some of the countries? Uh, one can presume that they're saying, we'll let pass your ship under this condition. And so the world is starved of oil. And if each countries do their private deal with Iran, it will be very hard for Trump to intervene and take things back to the 3 months ago.
So it's really who's making the deals. It's a subversion of the
Right.
rules order that
Absolutely.
which we were talking about.
Yeah.
Well, Nayan Chanda, it was a delight talking to you. Thank you for speaking to SpeakEasy, and we just wait and watch and see what the next Truth Social post has to say.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining us at Frontline.
Thank you.